Task two for today, I'm going to have to do a reading task on the internet because I do not have my book here in school, so I'm going to have someone else read it to you for your reading task today. Are you ready?
The boy looked at the Trunchbull, then he looked down at the enormous cake. "Eat, eat, eat!" the Trunchbull was yelling. Very slowly the boy cut himself another slice and began to eat it. Matilda was fascinated. "Do you think he can do it?" she whispered to Lavender. "No," Lavender whispered back. "It's impossible. He'd be sick before he was halfway through." The boy kept going. Then, when he had finished the second slice, he looked at the Trunchbull, hesitating. "Eat!" she shouted. "Greedy little thieves who like to eat cake must have cake. Eat faster, boy, eat faster. We don't want to be here all day, and don't stop like you're doing now. Next time you stop before it's all finished, you'll go straight into the chokey, and I shall lock the door and throw the key down the well." The boy cut a third slice and started to eat it. He finished this one quicker than the other two, and when that was done, he immediately picked up the knife and cut the next slice. In some peculiar way, he seemed to be getting into his stride. Matilda, watching closely, saw no signs of distress in the boy yet. If anything, he seemed to be gathering confidence as he went along. "He's doing well," she whispered to Lavender. "He'll be sick soon," Lavender whispered back. "It's going to be horrid." When Bruce Bogtrotter had eaten his way through half of the entire enormous cake, he paused for just a couple seconds and took several deep breaths. The Trunchbull stood with hands on hips, glaring at him. "Get on with it," she shouted. "Eat it up." Suddenly, the boy let out a gigantic belch, which rolled around the assembly hall like thunder. Many of the audience began to giggle. "Silence!" shouted the Trunchbull. The boy cut himself another thick slice and started eating it faster. There were still no signs of flagging or giving up. He certainly did not look as though he was about to stop and cry out, I can't eat anymore, I'm going to be sick." He was still in there running. And now a subtle change was coming over the 250 watching children in the audience. Earlier on, they had sensed impending disaster. They had prepared themselves for an unpleasant scene in which the wretched boy, stuffed to the gills with chocolate cake, would have to surrender and beg for mercy. And then they would have watched the triumphant Trunchbull forcing more and still more cake into the mouth of the gasping boy. Not a bit of it. Bruce Bogtrotter was 3/4 of the way through and still going strong. One sensed that he was almost beginning to enjoy himself. He had a mountain to climb, and he was jolly well going to reach the top or die in the attempt. What's more, he had now become very conscious of his audience and of how they were all silently rooting for him. This was nothing less than a battle between him and the mighty Trunchbull. Suddenly someone shouted, "Come on, Brucey, you can make it." The Trunchbull wheeled around and yelled, "Silence!" The audience watched intently. They were thoroughly caught up in the contest. They were longing to start cheering, but they didn't dare. "I think he's going to make it," Matilda whispered. "I think so too," Lavender whispered back. "I wouldn't have believed anyone in the world could eat the whole of the cake that size." "The Trunchbull doesn't believe it either," Matilda whispered. "Look at her, she's turning redder and redder. She's going to kill him if he wins." The boy was slowing down, there was no doubt about that, but he kept pushing the stuff into his mouth with the dogged perseverance of a long-distance runner who had sighted the finish line and knows he must keep going. As the very last mouthful disappeared, a tremendous cheer rose up from the audience, and children were leaping onto their chairs and yelling and clapping and shouting, "Well done, Brucey! Good for you, Brucey! You've won a gold medal, Brucey!" But the Trunchbull was not pleased that Bruce had finished the whole chocolate cake. The Trunchbull stood motionless on the platform. Her great horsey face had turned the color of molten lava, and her eyes were glittering with fury. She glared at Bruce Bogtrotter, who was sitting on his chair like some huge overstuffed grub, replete, comatose, unable to move or to speak. A fine sweat was beading his forehead, but there was a grin of triumph on his face. Suddenly the Trunchbull lunged forward and grabbed the large empty china platter on which the cake had rested. She raised it high in the air and brought it down with a crash right on the top of the wretched Bruce Bogtrotter's head, and pieces flew all over the platform. The boy was by now so full of cake he was like a sack full of wet cement, and you couldn't have hurt him with a sledgehammer. He simply shook his head a few times and went on grinning. "Go away!" screamed the Trunchbull, and she marched off the platform, followed closely by the cook.